3 months ago, an 84-year-old woman vanished from her home, and today, the people trying to find her might be too busy fighting each other to solve the case.
Yeah, it's a completely wild situation.
Right. So welcome to this deep dive. If you're joining us today, you're about to step into a missing persons investigation that started as a national tragedy and quickly morphed into this massive, bitter turf war.
Exactly. And we really need to look at the facts first.
Yeah, let's just lay out the facts. On February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie was abducted from her home in Arizona.
She's 84 years old.
Right, 84. And she's also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the host of the Today Show.
Which is exactly why this case instantly dominated the national news cycle.
Totally. Because of who her daughter is, the family put a staggering $1 million reward on the table.
$1 million.
$1 million. And the public actually responded. I mean, over 3,000 ticks poured into the investigators' tip lines.
Yeah, and in fact, 360 new tips arrived just recently.
But despite all that money, all that intense public attention, and thousands of possible leads, the case remains completely frozen.
It really is. I mean, the sheer volume of tips alone should have generated a solid lead by now.
You would think so, right?
Definitely. When you cross the 3,000 tip threshold in any investigation, you usually expect to find a pattern. But instead of seeing a unified task force sorting through that massive pile of data, we're seeing an unprecedented breakdown in communication between local and federal authorities.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We're looking at a stack of sources today.
A really diverse stack, too.
Yeah, ranging from local Arizona news reports and national entertainment updates to a Fox News podcast interview and an MSNOW opinion segment.
So we're getting a lot of different angles on this.
Exactly. We want to unpack the physical evidence of this baffling crime, and we also need to understand how a massive jurisdictional turf war between the local police and the FBI is threatening to derail the entire search.
And we should probably clarify our stance here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just to be clear right up front, we aren't taking sides today. We're impartially laying out what our sources claim so you can understand the mechanics of this standoff. Because before we can understand the political infighting, we really have to look at the physical evidence they're fighting over.
Right. And the investigators actually secured a major piece of visual evidence on the very night of the disappearance.
The doorbell camera.
Right. Yeah, they recovered doorbell camera footage from Nancy Guthrie's house. And the video is terrifying.
It really is.
It shows a suspect the authorities have dubbed Porch Guy just standing right outside the front door.
And he's heavily masked, isn't he?
Completely. He's wearing a balaclava that covers his entire head and face, and he's wearing thick gloves. He's also carrying a backpack and appears to be armed.
And he clearly knew the camera was recording him, right? Because according to the reports, he went out of his way to disable it.
Oh, absolutely. He actively tampers with the doorbell camera.
He tries to cover the lens with his gloved hand first.
Right. And when he realizes that isn't working, he violently rips a plant right out of the front yard.
Wow.
Yeah, he uses the dirt and the leaves to block the camera's view completely.
He really took extreme countermeasures to hide his identity.
He did. And what makes this detail so critical is the technical back and forth that happened next.
Right. The cloud data.
Exactly. The suspect likely assumed that by tampering with the camera or potentially trying to delete the footage from the local system, he destroyed the evidence. But modern doorbell cameras don't just store video on a local hard drive anymore.
They constantly ping the cloud,
Right.
which is how the FBI actually got their hands on that video. They worked directly with Google to recover the cached data from the doorbell system.
Which is pretty incredible technology.
It is. It's basically like digging through a digital trash can to find a crumpled up photograph. They smoothed it out, undeleted it from the cloud servers, and managed to extract the image of Porch Guy.
It was a massive win for the investigation right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because recovering cloud cache data requires specialized digital forensics, the local system essentially tells the cloud, hey, delete this file. But the cloud often holds a temporary ghost copy for a short period before overwriting it.
So we had to move fast.
Really fast. By moving quickly, federal agents grabbed that ghost copy.
But here's where I get really confused. And I'm sure you listening at home are wondering the exact same thing.
What's that?
Well, with a $1 million reward on the table and over 3,000 tips coming in, how does an armed guy ripping a plant out of a front yard remain completely unidentified for 3 solid months?
I know, it sounds crazy, but it perfectly highlights the strict limitations of visual evidence.
What do you mean?
Well, think about how facial recognition software or just public identification actually works. You need distinctive features. A video is only helpful if you can recognize the person in it.
Oh, I see, because of the disguise.
Exactly. This suspect's balaclava, the heavy gloves, the immediate blocking of the lens, all of it eliminated the identifying markers investigators rely on. You simply can't run a face through a database if the video doesn't show a face.
So the visual evidence essentially hits a brick wall.
Yeah.
The tech worked, but the disguise defeated it.
That's a good way to put it. And when visual evidence fails, investigators are forced to pivot. They have to turn their attention toward the invisible evidence left behind at the crime scene.
It's trace evidence.
Right, DNA. When a suspect physically rips a plant out of the ground or touches a camera, they often leave microscopic skin cells behind, even with gloves on.
Wow, even with gloves.
Yeah. That invisible trace evidence becomes the only viable path to matching a real identity to the masked person in the video.
Okay, so the FBI recalling that Ring camera footage from the Google cache was a massive technological win. But according to our sources, that exact win instantly ignited a fiery dispute over when that recovery should have happened.
Yeah, the timeline itself became the issue.
Right. The timeline of the investigation suddenly turned into a political battleground. Let's introduce the two main figures in this fight. On one side, you have FBI Director Kash Patel.
And on the other side, you have Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos.
Exactly. Now, Director Patel recently went on Sean Hannity's podcast and dropped some very heavy accusations. He claimed Sheriff Nanos deliberately shut the FBI out of the investigation for 4 critical days.
Yeah, Patel argued that because the local sheriff kept federal agents locked out of the command center, the FBI couldn't access that Google cache data right away.
So he thinks it delayed the whole process.
Right. He insists the video could have been recovered much faster, and the manhunt could have started earlier if local authorities had just allowed the FBI to take the reins from day one.
But the local department aggressively denies that narrative. I mean, Sheriff Nanos and his team provided an official response pushing back on Patel's timeline.
They did.
They claim an FBI task force member was actually on the scene the very first night of the incident. The local department states they, along with the Guthrie family, notified the FBI promptly, and that coordination began without any delay.
So we're seeing two completely different realities being presented to the public here.
Totally. One where the FBI was stonewalled, and another where they were integrated immediately. But wait, I have to push back on Patel's aggressive narrative for a second here.
Go for it.
If local law enforcement legally holds jurisdiction over a missing persons case, which they do, isn't it standard procedure for the FBI to wait for an invitation?
Yes, typically.
Why is the FBI director treating a normal jurisdictional boundary like a deliberate blockade?
I mean, a local sheriff is elected by the county to run these cases. The FBI can't just barge into an Arizona town and commandeer the police station without breaking protocol, right?
Well, you're touching on a fundamental tension in American law enforcement.
Yeah.
Legally, you are absolutely correct.
In the United States, a missing person case is a state and local matter. The 10th Amendment essentially keeps the FBI from acting as a national police force that can just override local authority whenever they want.
Unless federal laws are broken, right?
Right, exactly. Unless federal laws are explicitly broken, like transporting a kidnapping victim across state lines. But usually, the FBI offers their specialized assistance, and the local agency decides whether to accept, reject, or limit that help.
So Sheriff Nanos was well within his legal rights to control the crime scene and manage the pace of the investigation.
He was entirely within his legal rights. But Patel's argument focuses on the practical reality of an abduction rather than the legal paperwork.
The urgency of it.
Exactly. In the world of missing persons, the first 48 hours dictate the entire trajectory of the case. That tight window is when physical evidence is freshest, when witnesses actually remember details clearly, and statistically, when a victim is most likely to be found alive.
Which is terrifying to think about.
It is. Patel is arguing that in those critical first 48 hours, bureaucratic delays, waiting for invitations, and territorial boundaries can literally mean life or death. He's saying the local department should have handed over the keys immediately because the FBI has the massive manpower to process digital evidence instantly.
And the local department is saying they were in charge, they followed procedure, and an FBI liaison was involved anyway, so Patel's claims of a blackout are false.
It perfectly illustrates the friction between local control and federal resources. The sheriff wants to carefully manage his own jurisdiction, while the FBI director believes federal power should override local boundaries in a high-stakes emergency.
And this bitter fight over the timeline bleeds directly into an even bigger fight over how that physical evidence is being handled. Which brings us back to that invisible trace evidence we talked about earlier, the DNA.
Right, the DNA evidence is the absolute center of this forensic deadlock.
Because they did find some, right?
Yes, the investigators successfully pulled DNA from Nancy Guthrie's home. But processing it isn't simple. They found what forensic scientists call a complex DNA mixture.
I've read about this in the source material, and it sounds like an absolute nightmare for a lab technician.
Oh, it really is.
A complex mixture means the sample contains genetic material from multiple different people, all jumbled together. It isn't a clean, single profile of the suspect.
Think of it like pouring strawberry, banana, and blueberry into a blender and hitting mix.
Okay.
Once it's blended into a smoothie, it's incredibly difficult to extract just the strawberry. At a crime scene, a complex mixture might contain Nancy Guthrie's DNA, the DNA of a delivery driver who touched the door 2 days prior, and the suspect's DNA.
All mixed together.
Yeah. Separating those profiles requires highly advanced algorithmic technology.
And according to our sources, that isolation process could take up to 6 months.
Up to 6 months, yeah.
6 months of waiting in a case where time is already the enemy. This is where the decisions made by the local authorities come under massive fire. Because according to Kash Patel, the FBI had hundreds of agents on standby.
He did.
They even had a fixed-wing airplane ready and waiting on the tarmac. Patel says he offered to load the DNA evidence onto that plane and rush it straight to the FBI's elite National Forensic Lab in Quantico, Virginia, for rapid analysis.
And the Quantico Lab is widely considered one of the premier forensic facilities in the world. Patel claimed their specialized computing power could have untangled that complex DNA mixture within days, completely bypassing the 6-month wait.
But Sheriff Nanos declined the FBI's airplane.
He did.
Instead, he spent a reported $200,000 to send the DNA to a private contracted lab down in Florida. He justified this massive expense by citing operational needs, saying the department preferred to keep all the evidence at a single lab rather than scattering different pieces of evidence across multiple federal and private facilities.
Well, keeping evidence at a single lab is a standard local procedure designed to protect the chain of custody.
Right.
Every time evidence moves between agencies or flies across the country, it creates a paper trail vulnerability. Defense attorneys love attacking a fragmented chain of custody. If the local lab handles everything, it's legally much cleaner.
I understand the legal logic, but honestly, that sounds like paying a $200,000 premium to ship your broken car to an out-of-state mechanic when the original manufacturer is offering to fix it overnight for free.
That's a fair point.
Why turn down the FBI's plane in their top-tier lab when an 84-year-old woman's life is on the line?
It creates a profound question of optics versus reality. Let's look closely at the sheriff's defense here. The local department clarified that the private lab in Florida and the FBI's Quantico laboratory are actually collaborating closely right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're sharing data across servers. Furthermore, recent statements from the police department note that multiple laboratories across the country are now supporting the analysis to speed it up.
So they're working together eventually. The science is happening.
The science is happening, but the optics of the initial decision are terrible. By refusing free, immediate federal help in a highly publicized case, the local investigation created a public relations nightmare.
I can see why.
Yeah. When the public hears that a sheriff turned down an FBI airplane and chose to spend $200,000 of local taxpayer money instead, it breeds suspicion. It makes people wonder if egos are getting in the way of the investigation.
And the public relations battle certainly doesn't stop there. Because while Director Patel aggressively points fingers at the local sheriff for slowing things down, former federal officials are pointing fingers right back at Patel, claiming he is the real problem.
Yeah, this part is fascinating.
We reviewed a deeply critical report from an MSNOW opinion segment featuring Christopher O'Leary. He's a national security intelligence analyst and a former senior executive at the FBI's counterterrorism division.
Okay.
And he did not hold back for a second.
No, he didn't. O'Leary publicly slammed Kash Patel's media tour regarding this case, calling his behavior entirely inappropriate for a sitting FBI director.
O'Leary accused Patel of self-promoting. According to O'Leary, Patel is diving into cable news and podcast interviews to compensate for a severe lack of operational and investigative experience.
It was a pretty brutal critique.
Very brutal. He basically accused the FBI director of using this tragic disappearance as a PR stunt to cover for his own ineptitude.
And O'Leary brought up a very specific structural detail to back his claim. He pointed out that Patel recently fired a man named Brian Driscoll.
Wait, who is Brian Driscoll, and why does his firing impact a kidnapping case in Arizona?
Good question. Brian Driscoll was the assistant director of the Critical Incident Response Group.
Okay.
That specific group manages the logistics of massive, complex events like hostage rescues or multi-state manhunts. According to O'Leary, Driscoll is the exact expert who would normally spearhead the federal response to an abduction of this scale. Yeah. Firing the top logistical expert right before a major crisis creates a severe leadership vacuum inside the agency.
So O'Leary is arguing that Patel hollowed out the actual expertise of the agency and is now blaming the local sheriff on television to distract everyone from his own internal failures.
That's the argument MS and now W presented.
It shows that the fighting isn't just between the local police and the FBI. There's a civil war of words happening among the federal experts themselves.
Which brings us to the most damaging part of this entire dynamic, the real-world impact of the infighting.
Exactly. When you hear all this intense crossfire between federal directors, local sheriffs, and former agents, you really have to wonder, does this media circus actually damage the investigation, or is it just background noise while the lab techs quietly do their work down in Florida?
It absolutely damages the investigation. Yes, the lab techs are still looking through microscopes, the complex DNA is still spinning in centrifuges, but a criminal investigation relies heavily on the public.
Right.
Remember those 3,000 tips we mentioned at the start? And the 360 new ones?
Yeah, the tip line is basically the only lead they have while they wait for the DNA.
Exactly. And people call tip lines when they trust the authorities. When citizens see a unified, competent force working together to solve a crime, they feel safe coming forward with weird things they saw in their neighborhood.
That makes sense.
But when leadership vacuums form and when public turf wars break out on podcasts and cable news, it actively erodes public trust. People start doubting the competence of the very people asking for help.
You can easily imagine someone thinking, why should I bother calling in my tip if the police and the FBI are just going to fight over who gets to investigate it?
Right.
Or they might fear their tip will just get lost in the bureaucracy while the directors argue on TV.
In a case where the visual evidence is blocked by a balaclava and the DNA evidence is potentially months away from yielding a clear result, public tips are the lifeblood of the case. The media circus deters the very people who might hold the missing piece of the puzzle.
So let's bring this all together. An 84-year-old woman, Nancy Guthrie, is missing. The only suspect investigators have is a heavily masked figure on a doorbell camera known as Porch Guy.
And the DNA evidence that could finally put a name to that face is caught in a bitter tug-of-war between local and federal authorities.
The FBI director says the local sheriff locked them out, wasted the golden 48-hour window, and rejected a free flight to the best lab in the country. The sheriff says they followed legal protocol, protected the chain of custody, and the FBI is overstepping its bounds.
And meanwhile, former federal agents say the FBI director is just putting on a show to hide his own lack of expertise after firing his top logistics guy.
It's an absolute mess.
It's a profound breakdown in collaborative law enforcement. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a deeply troubling point.
What's that?
Think about this. If a high-profile case involving a prominent TV host's mother, backed by a $1 million reward and unlimited federal resources, can become entirely paralyzed by bureaucratic infighting and bruised egos. Wait, no, I mean bruised egos and red tape. What chance does an ordinary family have when their loved one goes missing?
Wow, that is a heavy question to sit with. If all the money, public attention, and federal power in the world just leads to investigators fighting each other instead of solving the case, the system itself seems broken. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the information around you and remember to look past the noise to find the facts. We'll catch you next time.